The rifle shot echoed across the dusty plains of Wyoming territory in 1876, causing Nora Ellis to flinch as she stood behind the counter of her late father's general store. The small bell above the door jingled moments later, and in strode a man she'd never seen before, tall, broad-shouldered, and walking with the confident gait of someone who knew the wilderness like the back of his hand. "Afternoon, madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal sun-bleached brown hair. "Just passing through town and was hoping to stock up before heading north." Nora nodded, instinctively tucking her hands beneath her apron. "Of course, sir. What supplies do you need?" "Name's Kieran Nolan," he said with a slight smile. "And I could use some coffee, jerky, beans, and maybe some of that candy there for the trail." As Nora gathered his supplies, she tried to keep her hands hidden, moving quickly to package everything. 6 months of running her father's store alone after his passing had only added to the years of calluses from ranch work before that. Unlike the soft-handed ladies who frequented the church socials, her hands told stories of hard labor. When it came time to accept payment, she had no choice but to extend her hand. She saw his eyes flicker to her rough, work-hardened skin, and she quickly pulled back after taking his money. "You run this place alone?" Kieran asked, glancing around the neat but worn store. "Since my father passed last winter," Nora replied, her chin lifting slightly. "I manage." "I can see that," he said, his voice gentler than she expected from a man who looked like he'd faced down outlaws and survived harsh winters alone. "That's impressive, Mississippi." "Ellis. Nora Ellis." Their eyes met briefly before he nodded, packed his supplies, and headed back into the afternoon sun, leaving Nora to wonder about the stranger who didn't seem to judge her for her circumstances. 3 days later, Kieran returned, this time with a broken bridle that needed replacing. "Been working the north pasture for the Drummond Ranch," he explained. "They've taken me on for the season." Nora's eyebrows raised slightly. The Drummonds were the largest cattle operation in the county. "They must see something in you to hire you so quickly." Kieran shrugged. "I've been breaking horses since I was 15. Been working ranches across 4 territories since I turned 18. He didn't add that he was now 28, with 10 years of hard living etched into the lines around his eyes. As she wrapped the new bridle, her fingers worked deftly despite their roughness. When she handed him his purchase, their hands brushed, and she immediately withdrew hers. "Thank you, Miss Ellis," he said, and there was something in his steady gaze that made her wonder if he'd noticed her discomfort. Over the next several weeks, Kieran became a regular at her store. Sometimes he'd purchase necessities, other times it seemed he'd invented reasons to stop by. Nora found herself looking forward to his visits, though she maintained her professional demeanor. One day in late summer, the door burst open and 3 men entered, trail-worn cowboys with liquor on their breath despite the early hour. "Well, look at this fine establishment," the tallest one said, swaggering to the counter where Nora stood stiffly. "And an even finer proprietress. Can I help you, gentlemen?" Nora asked, her voice steady though her heart raced. The man leaned closer. "I think you can, darling. How about showing us what's in the back room?" "I'd appreciate if you'd make your purchases and move along," Nora replied, reaching beneath the counter where she kept her father's old pistol. The second man grabbed her wrist before she could reach it, yanking her hand forward. "Look at these hands, boys. Rougher than mine." He laughed cruelly. "What kind of lady has hands like these?" Nora's face burned with humiliation as they mocked her. She tried to pull away, but the man's grip tightened. The bell above the door jingled, and Kieran stepped inside. His eyes took in the scene in one glance. "I believe the lady asked you to move along," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "This ain't your concern, cowboy," the tall one sneered. Kieran's hand rested casually near his holster. "I'm making it my concern." What followed happened so quickly Nora barely had time to process it. Kieran moved with the speed of a mountain lion, disarming the first man and knocking the second away from Nora. The third reached for his gun but froze when Kieran's weapon appeared as if by magic, pointed steadily at his chest. "Now, you fellas are going to apologize to the lady and leave this establishment," Kieran said. "And you're not coming back." After the men stumbled out with muttered apologies, Nora let out a shaky breath. "Thank you." Kieran holstered his weapon. "Are you all right?" She nodded, but then looked down at her exposed hands, rough and red from years of work. "They weren't wrong about my hands." To her surprise, Kieran stepped forward and gently took her hands in his. His touch was warm and unexpectedly tender for a man whose strength she'd just witnessed. "These hands," he said softly, "tell me more about your character than any fancy gloves ever could." Nora tried to pull away, embarrassed. "They're ugly." "They're strong," he corrected. "They show me a woman who doesn't shy away from hard work, who takes care of herself and this business. There's nothing ugly about that." Their eyes met, and for the first time in years, Nora felt truly seen. After that day, their interactions shifted. Kieran began helping around the store when he wasn't working at the ranch, fixing the leaky roof, reinforcing shelves, even defending her from the occasional difficult customer. Nora found herself sharing stories of her childhood, of learning to work alongside her father after her mother died when she was just 12. "I never had time for the things other girls did," she admitted one evening as they sat on the store's back porch watching the sunset. "No embroidery circles or piano lessons. And yet you run this business better than half the men in town could," Kieran replied. Nora laughed. "That wouldn't be hard. Have you met the men in this town?" Kieran smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "I have. Makes me wonder why you haven't been snatched up by some lucky fellow already." Nora's amusement faded. "The fellows around here want a wife with soft hands who can pour tea properly, not someone who can shoe a horse or calculate profit margins." "Their loss," Kieran said quietly. As autumn approached, Nora became increasingly aware that Kieran's seasonal work would soon end. The thought of him moving on created an ache she hadn't anticipated. One rainy afternoon, as they restocked shelves together, she gathered her courage. "What will you do when the season ends at the Drummonds'?" Kieran paused, a can of peaches in his hand. "I usually head south for winter work." "Oh." Nora focused intently on arranging a display of fabric. "But I've been thinking about staying in these parts," he added carefully. Nora looked up, hope fluttering in her chest. "There's not much winter work here." "No," he agreed. "But there are other reasons a man might want to put down roots." Before she could respond, the door burst open and Mrs. Whitaker, the banker's wife, rushed in. "Nora, there's a fire at the Collins farm. Everyone's being called to help." They abandoned their conversation and hurried to join the bucket brigade. The Collins family, a widow, and her 3 young children stood watching helplessly as flames engulfed their small home and barn. For hours, Nora worked alongside the townspeople, passing buckets of water from the creek to the flames. By nightfall, they'd saved the barn but lost the house. Her hands were raw and bleeding from the rough buckets and frigid water. As the exhausted volunteers gathered around fires to warm themselves, Nora stood apart, looking at her damaged hands in the firelight. Years of work had made them strong but not invulnerable. She flexed her fingers, wincing at the sting. "You should have these tended to." Kieran's voice came from behind her. "They'll heal," she said, quickly hiding them in her skirts. "They always do." Kieran shook his head and took her hands gently in his. Without a word, he led her to where the doctor had set up to treat minor injuries. After her cuts were cleaned and bandaged, they walked slowly back toward town in the moonlight. "Mrs. Collins has nothing left," Nora said, her mind on the widow's tears. "I need to organize help for her family." Kieran looked at her with a warm expression. "Already thinking of others when your own hands are barely bandaged." Nora shrugged. "It's what neighbors do." Over the next days, Nora coordinated donations from her store and the community. Kieran spent his free time helping rebuild the Collins home before winter set in. Nora watched him teaching the oldest Collins boy to hammer nails and measure boards, his patience seemingly endless. On an unseasonably warm October day, Nora brought supplies to the building site. She found Kieran alone, the others gone for lunch. "You're good with them," she said. "The children." Kieran looked up from the window frame he was installing. "They're good kids. Brave, considering what they've been through." Nora set down her basket. "I brought food. And some liniment for your back. I noticed you wincing yesterday." "Thank you." He climbed down from his ladder. "Though I'm not as young as I once was, I can still put in a day's work." "I never suggested otherwise," she said with a smile, handing him a sandwich wrapped in cloth. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Kieran spoke again. "I've been meaning to finish our conversation from the other day." Nora's heart quickened. "About your winter plans?" "Yes." He set down his sandwich and turned to face her fully. I've been offered a permanent position at the Drummond Ranch. Foreman, starting next spring. That's wonderful, Nora said, genuine happiness in her voice. You deserve it. It means I'd be staying in Willow Creek, he continued. Permanently. I see. Nora tried to keep her tone neutral despite the hope blooming in her chest. The thing is, Kieran said, moving a step closer, I wouldn't be staying just for the job. There's someone here who's become important to me. Nora's breath caught. Is there? A remarkable woman who runs a store and organizes aid for her neighbors and works harder than anyone I've ever known. He took her hands in his, bandages and all. A woman who doesn't seem to realize how beautiful she is inside and out. Kieran, she whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I'm not a man of fancy words, Nora. I've lived rough most of my life. But I know what matters, and I know what I want. His thumbs gently stroked the backs of her hands. If you'd let me, I'd like to court you properly. Nora looked down at their joined hands, his strong and tanned, hers bandaged and rough. Most men want a different kind of woman. I'm not most men, he said simply. And I don't want a different woman. I want you, calluses and all. She smiled through tears. Then I accept your courtship, Mr. Nolan. As winter descended upon Willow Creek, Kieran and Nora's courtship became the talk of the small town. He escorted her to church on Sundays, helped in the store during busy times, and took her on proper buggy rides through the snow-covered countryside. For Christmas, he gifted her a pair of fine leather gloves, lined with soft rabbit fur. Not because you need to hide your hands, he explained, but to protect them when the work gets too harsh. Nora gave him a hand-knitted scarf she'd worked on late into many nights, her sore fingers struggling with the delicate needles she hadn't used since childhood. When he wrapped it around his neck with unmistakable pride, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the crackling fire in her store. As spring thawed the frozen ground, Kieran moved into the foreman's cabin at the Drummond Ranch. His visits to the store became even more regular, often arriving with wildflowers he'd picked along the way. One April evening, as they walked along the creek that wound behind the town, Kieran seemed unusually quiet. Is something troubling you? Nora asked. He stopped walking, turning to face her. I've been thinking about the future, Nora. Oh, she felt a flutter of nervousness. I've saved most of my wages over the years, he said. Never had much reason to spend them. And now I find myself with enough to make plans I never thought possible. Nora waited, hardly daring to hope what those plans might be. The Zimmerman place is for sale, he continued. It's small, just 80 acres, but the house is solid and there's good water. It would be enough to run a modest herd, maybe raise some horses. It's a beautiful property, Nora agreed, her heart racing. I'd still keep my position with the Drummonds until I could build up the stock, he explained. But eventually, it could support a family. He took her hands in his eyes serious. A family I hope to have with you, Nora Ellis. Her breath caught. Are you asking? Kieran nodded, then slowly knelt before her on the soft spring grass. I'm asking if you would do me the honor of becoming my wife. I may not be the richest man, but I promise to work every day to make you happy. Tears filled Nora's eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you. He rose and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that made her forget everything but the feeling of being truly loved. As he held her close, she became conscious of her hands resting against his chest and tried to move them away. Kieran caught them and brought them to his lips, kissing each callus and scar. These are the hands I'll hold for the rest of my life, he murmured against her skin. These beautiful, strong hands that will help build our home and raise our children. Nora looked into his eyes and saw no trace of dishonesty or pity. I never thought I'd find someone who would accept me as I am. I don't just accept you, Kieran said softly. I cherish you exactly as you are. They were married on a bright June morning in 1877, with the whole town in attendance. Mrs. Collins and her children sat in the front row, their new home a testament to the community's care. Mr. Drummond himself gave a toast at the small reception held in the town square. I've employed many men over the years, the rancher said, raising his glass, but few with the integrity and work ethic of Kieran Nolan. Nora, you've chosen well. And Kieran, my friend, you've chosen even better. Laughter rippled through the gathering as Nora blushed, and Kieran squeezed her hand beneath the table. That evening, they rode to the Zimmerman place, now the Nolan homestead, where Kieran had spent every spare moment preparing for their arrival. He lifted her from the wagon and carried her across the threshold of their new home. Inside, Nora gasped at the transformation. New curtains hung at the windows, a handmade quilt covered the bed, and a small vase of wildflowers adorned the table. But what caught her eye was the sign above the hearth, carved in wood, Ellis and Nolan General Store. "What's this?" she asked, turning to her husband in confusion. Kieran smiled. "I thought we might open a second location out here, closer to the outlying ranches. Your father's store in town is doing well with you managing it, but there's opportunity to expand. You want to run a store? Together?" Nora was stunned. "Why not? Between your business sense and my ability to handle the difficult customers," he winked, referencing the incident that had first brought them closer, "we'd make a good team. And it would give you something that's truly yours, not just your father's legacy, but something we build together." Tears of happiness filled her eyes. "You've thought of everything." "I've tried," he said softly, taking her hands and kissing them once more. "These hands have worked so hard. I want to work alongside them, sharing the load." Over the years that followed, the Nolan homestead flourished. Their second store location became a gathering place for the surrounding ranches. Kieran bred horses that gained reputation throughout the territory, while Nora's business acumen ensured their growing prosperity. In the spring of 1879, their first child was born, a daughter they named Rebecca, after Nora's mother. She arrived with a full head of dark hair and her father's determined chin. As Nora cradled her newborn, she noticed her hands, still calloused and work-worn, against the baby's perfect skin. "She's beautiful," Kieran whispered, sitting beside them on the bed. "Just like her mother." "I hope her life is easier than mine was," Nora said softly. Kieran traced a finger along their daughter's tiny fist. "I hope she has your strength, your determination." He looked up at his wife. "Your hands," Nora smiled, "and your heart." 2 years later, they welcomed a son, Thomas, who grew to have his mother's gentle spirit and his father's way with horses. The children thrived in the freedom of ranch life, learning both the value of hard work and the joy of accomplishment. By 1885, the Nolans had expanded their original 80 acres to over 200. The second store location had doubled in size, now offering everything from farm implements to fashionable fabrics imported from the East. Nora had hired a manager for her father's original store in town, allowing her to focus on their growing enterprises and family. One autumn evening, as they sat on their porch watching Rebecca, now 6, teaching 4-year-old Thomas to rope a practice post, Kieran took Nora's hand in his. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Regret what?" "Marrying a simple cowboy. Building this life that keeps your hands as calloused as they were the day we met." Nora turned to look at him, the lines around his eyes deeper now, his hair beginning to show streaks of gray at the temples. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment." He raised her hand to his lips, a gesture that had never lost its meaning between them. "These hands have built something remarkable," he said. "A business, a home, a family." Nora leaned against his shoulder, watching their children laugh in the fading light. "And they found the only man who could see their true worth." "I saw your worth from the first day," Kieran murmured against her hair. "I just had to convince you to see it too." As the children raced toward them, faces flushed with excitement and the promise of tomorrow bright in their eyes, Nora looked down at her hands intertwined with her husband's. The years of work showed in every line and callus, but they were no longer a source of shame. They were badges of a life well lived, of challenges overcome, of love discovered in the most unexpected place. And as Kieran had promised on that spring day by the creek, they were the hands he would hold for the rest of their lives. In the years that followed, those hands would rock cradles and tend wounds, balance ledgers and braid hair, plant gardens and hold grandchildren. And through it all, they would remain clasped with Kieran's, a silent testament to a love that saw beyond the surface to the heart of what truly mattered. For in the untamed beauty of the Wyoming territory, a cowboy and a shopkeeper had discovered that the most precious things in life often came disguised as imperfections, and that true love wasn't about finding someone perfect, but finding someone who saw your imperfections as the very things that made you perfect for them.